Most people think avoidance is just a personality quirk, a kind of coldness or shyness that someone simply has. But in reality, it's a sophisticated coping strategy. It's an armor built over years, sometimes decades, to protect the self from pain, rejection, or vulnerability. When someone lies behind that armor long enough, they begin to confuse self-protection with self-sufficiency. They tell themselves, I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. It's a compelling narrative because it feels safe, yet deep down, every human being is wired for connection. Even the most distant avoidant knows, at some unconscious level, that the wall they've built is not a home, it's a cage. What fascinates me is the moment that cage starts to crack. It's rarely dramatic. More often, it's a quiet, creeping realization, nights that feel a little emptier than usual, successes that taste a little hollower, relationships that slip through their fingers without any new ones to take their place. The strategies that once worked, filling time with work, hobbies, casual encounters, or digital distractions, start losing their numbing power. The avoidant begins to experience flashes of longing, nostalgia, and sometimes even grief for a closeness they spent years avoiding. That's the turning point. It's the first flicker of awareness that the cost of distance has exceeded the benefit of safety. This shift isn't just emotional, it's neurological. When people feel isolated, the brain's threat centers light up, the stress hormone cortisol rises, and the nervous system becomes dysregulated. Connection calms those systems. That's why even the most fiercely independent avoidant will eventually find themselves drawn to the very thing they fear: intimacy, warmth, and belonging. This is not weakness, it's biology. Our wiring doesn't care about our stories of self-reliance. It simply seeks equilibrium. When the pain of loneliness outweighs the fear of closeness, a deeper truth emerges. I do need someone. I need connection. I miss what I had. But awareness alone doesn't equal change. For an avoidant person, this realization can be profoundly disorienting. Imagine having built your identity on being untouchable, only to feel the stirrings of dependence and desire. The ego resists. It may first show up as irritability, as an urge to test whether you're still there, as subtle bids for attention cloaked in sarcasm or aloofness. Underneath those behaviors is the simple, human fear of being rejected at the very moment you're opening up. That's why this phase is so delicate. The avoidant is simultaneously craving closeness and terrified of it. They're at the edge of a psychological transformation, but they don't yet know the rules of engagement. And this is where your role and your boundaries become so crucial. Because if you've been the consistent giving partner, friend, or family member, you've likely felt drained by the one-sidedness. You may have stepped back to reclaim your energy. In doing so, you're not punishing them. You're allowing reality to speak louder than reassurance. It's the space you create that makes their absence of connection unmistakable. It's not manipulation, it's an invitation to clarity. And that clarity is the seed of change. When I say turning point, I'm not talking about a single event, but about a process, a gradual peeling away of illusions, a slow recognition that independence without intimacy isn't freedom, it's exile. Philosophically, you could think of it as the hero's journey in reverse. Instead of venturing outward to slay dragons, the avoidant's greatest act of courage is inward, dismantling the defenses that once kept them alive but now keep them alone. And here's the paradox: the very moment they start to see you differently, you're also starting to see yourself differently. You're no longer waiting for crumbs of affection. You're standing in your own worth, which forces the dynamic to shift. This is why I often tell audiences, don't rush to rescue someone at this stage. Let them experience their own awakening. Support does not mean self-erasure. The avoidant needs to feel the weight of their choices to truly value connection. Your steadiness, your clarity, your refusal to collapse into old patterns. These are what make the turning point real. Otherwise, it's just another fleeting episode of nostalgia that passes when their fear returns. So when the avoidant finally begins to sense their need for you, it's not a signal to go back to how things were. It's a moment to hold space, to communicate with calmness and directness, to show that intimacy is possible but only on mutual terms. It's also a mirror for them. I can no longer hide behind my old story. If I want this connection, I must step into it fully. That's the essence of growth, not a quick fix, but a willingness to meet reality without armor. And here's what I want you to take from this first insight. You are not powerless. The avoidance realization is not just about them, it's also about you seeing, maybe for the first time, how essential your own presence has been. When they finally recognize their need, you get to decide how or if you'll meet it. That choice is yours. The turning point belongs to both of you. When you've been the steady presence in someone's life, especially in the life of an avoidant, the paradox is that your reliability can become invisible. Human beings are wired to normalize what is constant. We stop noticing what is always there. A warm room, a steady heartbeat, a supportive partner, they all fade into the background until they're gone. For the avoidant, your patience, your understanding, your willingness to carry the emotional load has been a kind of oxygen. They breathed it in every day without realizing how much it sustained them. Then one day the oxygen level drops, the room feels different, and suddenly they're gasping for something they used to take for granted. That's why absence is powerful. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. When you step back, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, you interrupt a pattern. You stop feeding the system that allows avoidance to go unchallenged. This is not about teaching them a lesson. It's about honoring your own limits. And in doing so, you create the only conditions under which the avoidant can truly see you. Because it's in the silence after your voice is gone, in the emptiness where your presence used to be, that reality becomes undeniable. They feel the difference between isolation they chose and connection they lost. Psychologically, this moment works because contrast wakes up the nervous system. Our brains are designed to detect change. The avoidant may not have processed your warmth consciously, but their body did. Lower cortisol, steadier heart rate, a sense of belonging that allowed them to function. When that disappears, there's a physiological stress, hormones rise, sleep becomes restless, small anxieties grow louder. They may not name it as missing you, but they feel a gap that distractions can't fill. This is often when they begin reaching out indirect, liking old posts, sending a casual message, testing the waters. Underneath those gestures is a dawning realization. What I had was rare. What I had mattered. Philosophically, you can think of absence as the proof of value. In economics, scarcity raises price. In relationships, healthy scarcity raises awareness. But scarcity is not the same as withholding. You're not starving them of affection to gain control. You're ceasing to overgive so both of you can see the real exchange. That's why the most effective step back is calm and consistent, not dramatic. It's a quiet recentering of your own energy. It's saying, without words, I'm here, but I'm no longer here at the expense of myself. This is a radical shift, not only for the avoidant, but for you. Because you've probably built an identity around being the steady one, the patient one, the one who understands. When you stop filling every gap, you're forced to face your own fear, the fear that if you stop, they'll disappear. But here's the truth: if your connection only survives when you raise yourself, it's not connection, it's dependency. And the only way to test its strength is to stand in your own space and let the other person choose to meet you there. When the avoidant begins to feel the weight of your absence, you'll notice a change in tone. The defensive sarcasm softens. The small talk has an undercurrent of sincerity. There might even be direct acknowledgement, rare for them, of how much you've meant. This is a pivotal point. It's tempting to rush in to restore what was lost. But the deeper work is to hold the space, because what's happening in them is more than nostalgia. It's a confrontation with their own patterns. They're not just missing you, they're facing themselves. Think of it like light and shadow. Without darkness, light is invisible. Without absence, presence is unnoticed. Your distance isn't punishment, it's illumination. It reveals the contours of your value, the shape of the relationship, the cost of avoidance. And in that revelation lies the possibility of a new dynamic. One based not on you over-functioning and them under-functioning, but on two adults meeting in mutual respect. This is why the power of absence is so misunderstood. People think stepping back will make them lose the connection forever. But more often, if done with integrity, it clarifies the connection. It gives the avoidant the one experience they can't manufacture on their own, the lived reality of missing someone they took for granted. And that experience is far more persuasive than any speech, any plea, any ultimatum you could give. So if you're in this position now, remember your absence has a voice. It speaks a language of contrast the avoidant can finally hear. But it's only effective if it's rooted in self-care, not manipulation. The goal isn't to make them chase you. The goal is to create enough space for truth to emerge, for them and for you. And here's the essence you need to walk away with. Sometimes the most powerful way to show your value is to stop proving it. Up to this point, we've looked at the moment the avoidance starts to sense the loss and how your absence functions as a mirror. But there's a deeper layer to this shift that most people miss. The internal war the avoidant fights when intimacy and fear collide. This is where the real transformation lies, not on the surface of texts and phone calls, but in the quiet hours when their own mind becomes their opponent. Avoidance isn't just a behavior, it's a nervous system strategy. From childhood or early relationships, many avoidants learned that closeness meant danger. Criticism, rejection, humiliation, or suffocation. So they built a reflex pull away before you get hurt. That reflex feels like independence, But it's really fear disguised as freedom. When they start to miss you, they're not simply longing for you. They're bumping up against the very program they've been running their whole lives. And that's why this stage feels like an earthquake to them. Their old identity, I don't need anyone, is clashing with a new truth, I'm actually aching for someone. Psychologically, this is called cognitive dissonance, and it's profoundly uncomfortable. Two contradictory beliefs can't live in the same space without creating tension. On one hand, they still want to protect themselves. On the other, their biology and their heart are pulling them toward connection. The tension shows up as mixed signals. One day they reach out warmly, the next they retreat. One day they speak with vulnerability, the next they go silent. It's not because they're trying to manipulate you, it's because they're standing in the crossfire of two parts of themselves, the part that wants to be safe and the part that wants to be seen. This is where shame often enters the picture. Avoidants are not only afraid of closeness, they're often ashamed of that fear. They know at least intuitively that their pattern has cost them love, opportunities, even respect. So when they start to open up, they feel exposed, awkward, even childish. That shame can make them lash out or shut down again, which is why the process can feel so unpredictable from the outside. But if you can see it for what it is, a defense mechanism trying to dissolve, you'll understand why patience, boundaries, and clarity matter more than ever. Philosophically, you can think of this as a rite of passage. In mythology, the hero doesn't just slay a dragon, they confront their own shadow. For the avoidant, the shadow isn't out there. It's the fear of intimacy itself. To cross this threshold, they must endure vulnerability, admit need, and risk rejection. That's a terrifying prospect for someone who's built an entire identity around being untouchable. Yet this is also the most human thing about them, because every one of us in some way carries the same dilemma: how to protect ourselves without imprisoning ourselves. Watching an avoidant wrestle with that question is like watching the universal human struggle in high definition. And here's the hard truth: you cannot do this work for them. You can model healthy closeness, you can set boundaries, you can offer compassion, but you cannot dissolve their fear. That's an inside job. The best thing you can do in this phase is stay anchored in your own self-respect. Don't collapse into rescuing, don't over-explain, don't let their ambivalence pull you into chaos. Stand still. Speak plainly. Show that intimacy is possible, but only in a space of mutual accountability. That steadiness gives them a reference point, a lived example of connection without control. As they begin to face their fear, something remarkable can happen. The avoidant starts to discover that vulnerability isn't annihilation, it's relief. The wall they thought was keeping danger out was also keeping life out. Joy, intimacy, growth, love. When they taste even a small moment of safe closeness, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. Cortisol drops, oxytocin rises, trust slowly builds. It's like thawing after a long winter. But just like thawing, it's uneven. Some parts melt first, others stay frozen longer. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. A steady hand guides them farther than a dramatic gesture. This stage isn't just about them. It's also about you becoming clearer about your own limits and desires. Because as they step toward you, you'll feel your own triggers, your own doubts. Can you receive their vulnerability without losing yourself? Can you say yes without erasing your no? These questions are as much about your growth as theirs. In that sense, the avoidant's internal struggle becomes a mirror for your own. And that's the beauty of this whole process. It forces both people to become more conscious, more deliberate, more authentic. So as you watch them confront the fear of intimacy, remember that you're witnessing a human being trying to write a lifelong story. That takes courage. It also takes time. Your role is not to be their therapist or their savior. It's to be yourself fully, with open eyes and clear boundaries, offering connection that is strong enough to invite, but not so desperate that it smothers. And if you take nothing else from this point, take this: their fear of intimacy is real, but so is your power to choose how you engage with it. When the avoidant finally recognizes your value and begins reaching out, you arrive at a crossroads. Up until now, the story has largely been about their awakening, about their turning point, about how your absence clarified your worth, about their struggle with intimacy. But this final stage is really about you, because awareness on their part doesn't automatically equal transformation on yours. In fact, this is the moment when your own clarity and strength matter most. Think about what has shifted. For months, maybe years, you've been living in a dynamic where you were the steady one and they were the distant one. That pattern has been disrupted. They're now moving toward you, often with a mixture of sincerity, fear, and urgency. It can feel flattering, it can feel vindicating, but it can also be confusing. Do you step back into the same role as before? Do you meet them where they are now? Do you move on? Those are not automatic answers. They're conscious choices. And they require you to know very clearly what you're willing to build and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. This is where empowerment comes in. Empowerment doesn't mean punishing them or playing hard to get. It means standing in reality. The reality is that you now have evidence, not just of their need, but of your own growth. You've learned you can survive their distance. You've learned your presence has value. You've learned boundaries don't destroy connection, they reveal it. All of that learning becomes the foundation for your next move. One path is rebuilding. If you choose to stay, rebuilding means starting fresh, not resuming the old cycle. It means open conversations about fears, expectations, and responsibilities. It means establishing mutual practices of connection, honest check, in shared agreements, maybe even professional help if needed. Rebuilding is not about rescuing, it's about co-creating a new structure where both people feel safe enough to be present. And because the avoidant has already tasted the cost of distance, they're more likely to engage with those agreements if you hold them calmly and consistently. The other path is moving forward. Sometimes the healthiest outcome of someone realizing they need you is you realizing you don't need them anymore. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. You've grown, you've healed, you've reclaimed your energy. You may discover that what you truly want is no longer compatible with what they're able to offer. Moving on in that case is not a failure, it's a graduation. It's you stepping into a larger life with the hard-won wisdom you've earned. Both paths share a common denominator. You choose them deliberately, not reactively. That's the deeper philosophy here. When you act reactively out of guilt, fear, or validation, you recreate old patterns. When you act deliberately, out of self-knowledge and clarity, you create something new. And that's the real gift of the entire journey. The avoidance recognition isn't just a plot twist in their story, it's an invitation for you to write a new chapter in yours. Notice how this reverses the old dynamic at the beginning. The avoidant had the power to withhold or to engage. You were the one waiting, adapting, probing. Now the roles are balanced. Their realization places the decision in your hands. What you do with that decision defines not only the relationship, but also your own identity. Do you want to be the person who slides back into familiar pain, or the person who builds from strength and clarity? This is also a moment to reflect on what intimacy means to you, not the fantasy of intimacy, but the practice of it. Can you allow closeness without losing your individuality? Can you set boundaries without feeling guilty? Can you stay open without collapsing into self-sacrifice? These are not abstract questions, they're the daily disciplines of healthy connection. And if you can answer them honestly, you'll know which path, rebuilding or moving forward, is truly yours. What makes this stage so powerful is that it collapses the illusion of powerlessness. For a long time, you may have believed you had no choice but to wait for them to change. Now you see that the most important change has already happened, you. You're no longer chasing, pleading, or probing. You're standing, and from that place of standing, you can extend an invitation, or you can close a chapter with dignity. And here's the paradox, whichever path you choose, you win. If you rebuild, you do it on a foundation of mutual respect. If you move on, you do it with self-respect. Either way, you're living from truth rather than fear. That's the real liberation. But that's the point of the whole process. Not to get the avoidant to need you, but to get you to see your own worth so clearly that you act from it. So as you reach this juncture, don't rush. Breathe, reflect. Ask yourself what kind of life you're committed to creating. And then move forward, not because someone finally recognized your value, but because you've recognized it yourself. Because the moment their need for you becomes clear should be the moment your power to choose becomes non-negotiable.